Russian troops are reportedly withdrawing from Kharkiv, and in Mariupol, officials are negotiating the evacuation of some of the fighters taking shelter in the city's steelworks plant. After meeting in northern Germany, the G7 said it would not recognize forced border changes in Ukraine and stressed their concern about the international impact of the war.
Ukrainians struggle to find fuel for their vehicles, as Euronews' international correspondent Annalise Bourges reports.
Voters are going to the polls in Germany's North Rhine-Westphalia this weekend, and the vote in the country's most populous state could act as a test for Germany's chancellor. The moon will briefly turn red on Sunday, though not everyone will get to see the same view of the total lunar eclipse. Only people in North and South America will see the complete event. After weeks of bombardment, Russian troops are withdrawing from Kharkiv, with no new strikes reported in Ukraine's second-largest city over the past day. According to Ukrainian officials, Moscow's forces are now focusing on guarding supply routes, and they are also reportedly moving eastward to the Donbas region, attempting to seize parts of the area under Ukraine's control. Though both Kyiv and Moscow have announced the capture of a handful of villages in the region, as fighting has moved away from Kharkiv, Kyiv has also launched a counteroffensive near Izium, the city that has been under the control of Russian forces since the beginning of April. In Mariupol, Ukrainian officials are negotiating the evacuation of 60 severely wounded fighters taking shelter in the city's steelworks plant. And in the country's capital, a group of U.S. senators met with Ukraine's president in a show of support.
Good, and very happy to see you, sir.
The visit to Kyiv comes as a new military aid budget has stalled in the U.S. Senate. For the past 3 days, diplomats from the G7 have gathered in northern Germany to discuss the war in Ukraine. As the meetings have come to a close, they stressed several points, including the group's refusal to recognize forced border changes in Ukraine and their concern about the international impact of the war. On Saturday, Germany's foreign minister said that we must not be naive. This grain war and looming hunger is not collateral damage. It's a deliberately chosen instrument in a hybrid war that is being waged right now. Russia is preparing the ground for a new crisis in order to deliberately weaken international cohesion against Russia's war. The diplomats have also called on Belarus and China not to help Russia in the war, and they touched on the possible addition of Finland and Sweden into NATO. Finland shares a 1,300-kilometer-long border with Russia, making it the longest point of contact with the country in the EU.
We believe firmly that Sweden and Finland should accede NATO. I look forward to speaking with Jens Stoltenberg a bit later this afternoon. And we wish also that there not only be an accession of Sweden and Finland, but a quick accession, which is fundamental in the circumstances.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin said that Finland joining the alliance would be a mistake, and the country's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that the West has announced a total hybrid war against his country. And he added that it's hard to predict how long all this will last, but it is clear that the consequences will be felt by everyone, without exception. We did everything to avoid a direct clash, but now that the challenge has been thrown down, we of course accept it. We are not strangers to sanctions. They are almost always there in one form or another. On Saturday morning, his country also switched off its energy supply to Finland. However, the justification for the move was unpaid bills, not the country's possible addition to NATO.
One of the many unwanted consequences of war is the disruption of all aspects of daily life. Scenes like this one have become increasingly common, not only here in Odessa, but also in other parts of southern Ukraine, where there is an acute shortage of fuel. Many residents say sometimes they have to spend days looking for petrol.
Out of the 5 gas stations I went to today, only this one has petrol. We paid online for a certain volume and then came here to fill up.
Because we need to work, I sometimes have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and look for a petrol station. That's the situation in our country. What can I do? It's not our fault, it's not the government's fault. That's why I think we have to be understanding. We went to petrol stations all day yesterday and I couldn't find gas. Today my friends told me there was fuel. Life is hard. We don't have work. Rockets fall. We're on pins and needles because we don't know where they'll hit. Now I work as a taxi driver, but work is scarce. I don't know what to do. We wait for this to end in victory. Glory to Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government says it is working to fix the problem by establishing new supply lines by the end of the month of May. Until then, residents here will have to be patient, but many say they understand these are exceptional circumstances and are ready to do everything in their power to help support their country. Annelise Borges from Odessa in southern Ukraine for Euronews.
Voters are going to the polls in Germany's most populous state this weekend, in what some observers call a federal election in miniature. That's because the vote in North Rhine-Westphalia on Sunday could have the potential to influence the country on a national level. And it could also turn the balance of power in Berlin. That's because some see it as a test for its chancellor, whose popularity is falling since his election just 8 months ago. And Olaf Scholz's response to the war in Ukraine and his country's energy crisis could influence the result. The region has also been ruled by the country's opposition party, the Christian Democrats, and the coalition since 2017. And is now polling neck to neck with Scholz's SPD. But if the CDU wins this election, it could strengthen the influence of its new president, Friedrich Merz. The region is also referred to as Germany's Rust Belt and is home to 18 million people, making it the residence of just under a quarter of the country's population. Meaning elections in this region are usually seen as a reflection of the rest of the country.
An outbreak of COVID-19 in North Korea is being labelled a great disaster by the country's leader Kim Jong-un. It's led to the first death since the start of the pandemic, and there are fears a major outbreak could be hugely damaging to the nation of 25 million people. North Korea is already struggling with the lack of medicine, food shortages, and an economy weakened by sanctions and a total shutdown of its borders. 27 people are reported to have died from the coronavirus, but about 500,000 are thought to have developed fevers since the end of last month. North Korea has a very low vaccination rate after rejecting international offers of vaccines. Officials argued they'd controlled the spread of COVID by closing off all borders since January 2020. South Korea has offered aid to its northern neighbour, but Pyongyang has yet to respond.
The World Health Organization says China's zero-tolerance COVID-19 strategy is unsustainable. Shanghai, the country's economic capital, has been under complete lockdown for 6 weeks, but is still recording new coronavirus cases. But the city's officials say they are helping key manufacturers and delivery services back to work, even though 2 million residents have remained confined in their homes for nearly a month and a half.
For many Earthlings on Sunday, the moon will appear to briefly turn red, marking this year's first total lunar eclipse. The rare visual is the result of the moon passing through the Earth's shadow, blocking much of the sun's light from reaching our nearest neighbor.
The wonderful thing is that when the moon is entirely in the shadow, when it's in the darkest part of the shadow, the moon will actually look to your eyes to be kind of rose-colored or orange-colored. And that's actually because your eyes are adjusting to that darker light. And in fact, the only light getting up to the moon at this point is light that is scattering through the Earth's atmosphere.
The event comes as scientists are preparing to return to the moon's surface. Next year, NASA will attempt to land a lunar rover called Viper. It will look for resources on the moon's surface so that the agency could one day establish a base camp on our celestial neighbor. But for now, people around the world will be able to see a rare event that has inspired humans for much of our history.